Lessons from the screen, what we mean is we go through different documentaries to tell you what they gon' do. Give you our lessons, give them our blessings. If they trash, we tell you there is no second guessing. Knowledge is power, but time is precious. And we're here to keep you from them lessons. So sit back as we groove, giving you the review, so you only spend time on the docs that you need to. Yo, welcome back to another episode of Lessons from the Screen. We are back this week with a brand new show. This is the show where we review whether or not a show, a documentary, a document, anything that you can get from any particular digital screen is worth your time, is worth watching. We waste our time, our energy, and our brain power so that you don't have to. You're welcome. Lessons from the Screen is brought to you by PackSync through the Freedom Train Network. You can find us at www.freedomtrainradio.com or on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. My favorite is Stitcher, of course, because you know it's not dependent on whether you have an Android or iPhone. Everybody can download Stitcher. But anyways, be sure to head to those places and leave a review. Be sure to head to thefreedomtrainradio.com and leave a review on the shows. Tell us what you think. Then be sure to head to www.packsync.org to show some love and support for our sponsors. PackSync is a black activist and advocacy organization focused on developing the black community through a shift in culture, education, and economics. As always, Lessons from the Screen has a frame of reference and perspective that is aligned with that of the black community. So the things we talk about will be looked at with the racial component involved and with some lessons and things that can be used to improve the community. During this episode of Lessons from the Screen, we will be jumping into school shootings. The history of school shootings will be looked at, as well as looking to see if there have been mass shootings at black schools in recent times. We will also be looking at the political debate and how both conservatives and liberals are using the black community to advance their goals. In this episode of Lessons from the Screen, we will be looking at school shootings and the black community. So, school shootings go back to the mid-1700s. In 1764, in Greencastle, Pennsylvania, 10 people were killed and 2 more were injured when 4 Native Americans entered the schoolhouse and shot the schoolmaster, Enoch Brown, and killed as many as 9 children. And while only the teacher was shot, as the children were killed with melee weapons, it is still one of the earliest incidences involving mass murders in schools, and that was before the United States officially became the United States. Now, what's interesting about that last point about the weapons being melee weapons is that China had a rash of school mass murders 5-10 years ago roughly, completely involving melee weapons such as knives and hammers and things like that. So I throw that out there to say to a lot of people who would say that it's impossible to have mass murders and things like that if you remove guns from the equation. I do agree it would definitely reduce the number. It would definitely reduce. I mean, studies have shown that if you reduce the number of guns available, then you reduce the number of gun-related incidences. Of course, that's like a duh moment. So moving forward, I do want to go into the numbers of school shootings throughout the centuries in America, and these are just the raw incidences. So if a gun went off, regardless of whether or not anyone was hurt, we're going to be looking at those numbers. So in the 19th century, which was 1800 to 1900, we saw at least 37 school shootings, with the decade averages increasing towards the end of the century. In the 20th century, which is 1900 to 2000, we saw at least 227 school shootings, with a steep increase in the 1970s and another steep increase in the 1990s. It almost doubled. Now, in the 21st century, which is basically been the last 2 decades, roughly, the last 18 years, we have seen 211 school shootings. And again, we are only 2 decades in. So suffice to say that what this does tell us is that school shootings are not new. They have been a part of American history since before there was an American era to label history with. But what this does also show us is that the problem is getting worse. Now, it's not just about school shootings. because that would be an empty stat if we were to just talk about harmless incidences involving guns. So with that, I decided to break out how many of those shootings resulted in the deaths of 3 or more people going back to the 1970s, and I found a total of at least 31. Now we're going to go through. So in the 1970s, there were 3 shootings that resulted in 3 or more deaths. And that's how I'm classifying this. A school shooting that results in 3 or more deaths, I'm classifying as a mass murder school incident. So in the 1970s, there were 3 of these incidences. In 1976, in Fullerton, California, a 37-year-old custodian at California State University killed 7 people. In 1970, at Kent, Ohio, the Kent State protest of the Vietnam War, the Ohio National Guard fired on students, killing 4 people. The students were unarmed. 1974, in Olean, New York, an 18-year-old honor student killed 3 adults at his high school. So those were the 3 incidences in the 1970s. I know I'm talking crazy when I say incidences. I know the word is incidents. I get it. But incidences feels better to me. So we're moving on to the 1980s. So in the 1980s, there were 2 that resulted in deaths of 3 or more. In 1989, in Stockton, California, at Cleveland Elementary, a 24-year-old killed 5 children before killing himself. And in 1985, in Tacoma, Washington, at Spanaway Middle, a 14-year-old killed her 15-year-old ex-boyfriend and another friend before killing herself. And yes, I said she. Now, I want to go back a little bit before we go forward. So I want to say that in the 1970s, out of the 30 total school incidents that there were in the 1970s, 3 resulted in the deaths of 3 or more children. And that number is up from 18 in the 1960s, 18 total school-related incidences, 30 in the 70s. 3 of those related in 3 or more deaths, resulted in 3 or more deaths, I'm sorry. And then in the 1980s, there were 39 total school-related gun incidences, and 2 of those resulted in the deaths of 3 or more. In the 1990s, we're coming into the 1990s now, there were 62 school-related shootings, and of those 62 school-related shootings, 9 of them resulted in 3 or more deaths. Some of those we're very familiar with, such as the 1999 Columbine High School massacre, which killed 15 people in Colorado. Then there was the 1991 University of Iowa shooting, in which a 28-year-old former graduate student killed 4 faculty and 1 student, and then killed himself. There was the 1998 Westside Middle School in Arkansas, which a 13-year-old and 11-year-old killed a teacher and 4 students. Then there was the 1998 Springfield, Oregon, at Thurston High School, a 15-year-old killed his parents, then drove to the school and killed 2 students. In 1992, in Olivehurst, California, at Lyndhurst High, a 20-year-old former student killed 3 students and 1 teacher. 1996, in Moses Lake, Washington, at Frontier Middle, a 14-year-old killed the teacher and 2 students in algebra. 1996 in San Diego, California, at San Diego State, a 36-year-old killed 3 professors. In 1997, Pearl, Mississippi, at Pearl High School, a 16-year-old killed his mother, his ex-girlfriend, and another student. In 1997, at West Paducah, Kentucky, at Heath High School, 3 students were killed by a 14-year-old. And we're moving into the 20th century, and as I said earlier, there were 227 school-related incidents in the 20th century, 63 of them from 2000 to 2009, and 9 of those shootings resulted in 3 or more deaths. First one was in Blacksburg, Virginia, in 2007. The Virginia Tech school shooting, in which a 23-year-old student killed 32 people and himself. I believe that's the 3rd largest mass shooting in American history, American modern history. Yeah, right, whatever. Anyways, and the reason I say that is because when they classify and rank these mass murders, they conveniently leave off all of the black people that were killed and slaughtered in these mass incidents throughout history. So they try to say things like the modern era, in which they still conveniently leave off a lot of the modern era. We're talking post 1960 era mass murder events that happened to black people. And so that's why I say, yeah, whatever.